Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with my June wrap-up. Again, slowly catching up on wrap-ups, and I'm also filming this in a little bit of a different spot, so, you know, that's exciting, I guess. So I'm actually just gonna do one part because I did not read very many books in June. So let's just jump into it. The first book I have to talk about is The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. This has gotten a lot of buzz over the last couple of years. This is a contemporary where we are following two main characters, Alicia and Mukesh. Mukesh is an elderly man whose wife has passed away fairly recently, and in addition to the really hard time he has losing her, he's also struggling to connect to his granddaughter. Because his granddaughter and his wife, so her grandmother, were always very close and they bonded over books, and Mukesh has never really been a big reader, so he decides that if he can learn a little bit more about books, if he can maybe read something, then he'll have something to talk to his granddaughter Priya about. So he ends up going to the local library where he meets Alicia, and Alicia is a really smart teenager. She is working at the library just over the summer, and she is really dealing with a lot at home with her mother and with her just kind of family in general, and so Alicia really doesn't want to be here at the library initially. She's never actually been a big reader. Like, she does incredibly well in school, but she doesn't really read for fun, and that of course slowly starts to change because even though the initial interaction between Alicia and Mukesh is not very good, Alicia feels really bad about how she kind of snapped at him or how she treated him, and as kind of a peace offering she gives him book recommendations because that's what he came in for. And Alicia had found this list of books that is like just in case you need it or something, so she doesn't know who wrote this list, and she just kind of starts like working her way down the list, recommending those books to Mukesh, who does not know that she found a list with those titles on it. And the two of them end up becoming friends and getting to know more about each other's life and what they're dealing with, and I really liked this. I can definitely see why this has been so popular. You know, it's a book that, among other things, one of the really big ideas is like the power of stories and the importance of reading, and I really love that. You know, of course that's gonna work for me. And I also really liked Alicia and Mukesh, and one thing that I really appreciate is I feel like sometimes with books that have this kind of friendship between different generations, you know, you have like a young person and an older person, I feel like sometimes it can feel a little bit one-sided in that the young person does all the learning, you know, which obviously it is important to learn from elders and everything, but I really appreciated in The Reading List how Alicia felt like a fully developed character in her own right, and I feel like the relationship between her and Mukesh, this really lovely friendship, felt very equal, and I really liked that. And I also really thought that Mukesh's relationship with his wife was portrayed so beautifully, with his granddaughter as well, with his daughters, and how they're well-meaning but maybe they don't always know what he wants or what is best for him, even though they think they do. Like, just the relationships in general I think were done really well. As far as the heavy elements that this book deals with, I should have mentioned at the beginning that I'm putting all content warnings for the books that I talk about in the description, as well as links I mentioned and everything, and I'm going to do something that my friend Olivia Savannah does when there's like a very specific content warning. I'm gonna put it first in the list because there's something that this book deals with that I was not expecting and was very difficult for me, and it's not the kind of thing, like, I think knowing the premise of this book would not communicate that you should look for this content warning, you know? So that's gonna be the first one that I list, and I feel like overall the book handled it well. The way it was portrayed was like incredibly upsetting, but intentionally so, and thoughtful. Like, it was very thoughtful, and like I think the shock is part of the point. Like, it was not used for shock value, if that distinction makes any sense. I still would have liked things to go differently, but I think I understand where the author was coming from. I had kind of mixed feelings about the ending. There were some parts I really liked, especially as I thought about it more, but there were also elements of it that almost made the story like feel a little less special in a way. I don't know. And then the other thing is, with the list of books themselves, I actually had read almost all of them, which was kind of cool, but of the list I would have liked to see a little bit more variety because a lot of them were classics. I think 7 or 8 of the 10 were classic novels, and you guys know, like, I really enjoy reading classics. I'm part of like a classic reading book club, so I totally agree that classics can be really wonderful books and really important, but I think it would have been kind of cool to have a few more modern books as well to show that great literature is also being written now. Like, I think that would have been really cool. And again, there were a few in there, and I did appreciate the variety overall. Like, we didn't have just white authors or just Western authors, but And I also recognize that like with a list of 10 books, it's going to be hard to have a ton of variety because it's such a small sample. But anyway, that was just one thing that I noticed. So I did really like and appreciate this. It's not like an all-time favorite for me, but it definitely really got to me emotionally. There are parts that I thought were really beautiful. As I said, the relationships were great. And actually like the reading element, there were some parts that felt a little like, I don't want to say on the nose, but like the writing felt a little like over-explained in a way, but then there were also these really subtle moments that I loved. And like one thing that I thought was really interesting and fun about this book is I feel like Alicia's experience of like becoming a reader, one thing that's very cool about it is she's reading these like older books. Like one of the books she reads is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and like the excitement of reading an old book and not knowing what's going to happen. Like, I think that's cool. Anyway, I've talked a lot about this one, but I gave the reading list 4.5 stars. Next, I finished King and the Dragonflies by Case and Callender. This is a reread, and I have a whole live show with myself and Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophes. This is part of my Not a Genre book club, so Olivia Savannah was my guest for this episode, and this is a contemporary book. We're following King as our main character, and he is a young black boy growing up in the South, and his brother Khalid has died very suddenly and very recently, and he was very young. He's only a few years older than King, and so of course King and his parents are really struggling with that. So this is a book that deals a lot with grief. And as the back of the book says, it would be easier if King could talk with his best friend Sandy, but before he had died, Khalid had told King to end the friendship. You don't want anyone to think you're gay too, do you? So this book deals with homophobia and with race and racism, as well as grief and a lot of other things. And one of the big things that happens in the book is that Sandy actually goes missing, and so King has to kind of figure out if he's going to come forward with what he knows or what he thinks about where Sandy is and what happened to him. And also Sandy is basically the only kid who is like out at their school, and King is really struggling with how honest he wants to be about what he's starting to realize about himself and like his sexuality and everything. And as I said, this is a reread, but I loved this just as much the second time. I think it is beautifully written. I think the balance between showing the audience, like especially because this is a middle grade book, like the younger readers who are the intended audience, showing them that like being honest about what they might face, but also showing that there is hope and love and there are people out there who are on your side and who support you. I just think that balance was beautifully done. I think that's something that authors of any age range could learn from. I think that's really important in order to create a meaningful story that also may affect some things in the real world, you know, including the perspectives of the people reading it. I think the handling of grief is done so well here. One of the things I think this book shows really beautifully is that people who love you and care about you don't necessarily have to understand everything about you. Like, you can accept somebody without being exactly the same as them, and even if you're stumbling a little bit, even if you make mistakes or you're not sure how to have these conversations, that doesn't always mean that somebody is not willing to have those conversations, you know? And I thought that was really beautiful. And as I said, this also deals a lot with the intersection of race and sexuality, and the like kind of unique difficulties that presents. Yeah, I just think this is a beautiful book. I gave King and the Dragonflies 5 stars again. Next, I finished Like a Charm by Elle McNichol. This is the first book in a series. It might just be a duology, but I'm not sure. And this is a contemporary fantasy set in Edinburgh. And our main character is a girl named Ramya. And Ramya has always kind of been able to see more than most people. She sees things that others don't, and she sees things that she's not maybe meant to see in terms of like these magical creatures that exist in Edinburgh. And her family overall, especially her parents, are really not receptive to that, and Ramya has really grown up without a lot of love and support. One of the only people who did ever give her that was basically cut off from the family, and so it's really hard reading about how just unhappy and emotionally neglected Ramya is. Like, I just loved her and wanted to give her a hug the whole time. Ramya ends up getting pulled more into like her family secrets and the things that maybe they know about these like magical creatures that Ramya is seeing, and kind of the growing threat from some of them. And I did really enjoy this. I agree with like a few of my friends who have read this one that this is not my favorite of the books by Elle McNichol that I've read, but I still thought it was very well done. I really loved the creative use of folklore here. I just really enjoyed that. And as I said, I really cared for Ramya as a main character. I really liked some of the developing family relationships, like specifically the family members that treat Ramya better. I really liked that as the book went on, we spent more time with them and Ramya got to be around them more. In terms of the plot, this one took me a little longer to get into because like a lot of it at the beginning, like the first chunk is just like people not telling Ramya things, which I understand why it happened that way for the story, but it just wasn't super engaging to read. And then similarly, I understand why Ramya's loneliness is like such an important part of the story. It's very poignant and very well written, so I'm not saying that should have been like taken out, but I do think that those parts could have been written in a way that was a little more engaging, or maybe that we just had more other characters throughout the book. Like I really, really love Ramya's cousin, and so I would have liked to see just, I guess, more side characters at the beginning as well. And then I also really, really loved the themes of this book, which is not a surprise. I thought those were just really beautiful, and I thought the way that those connected to the fantasy elements was very interesting. So I did enjoy this. I'm looking forward to continuing, and I gave Like a Charm 4 stars. Next, I finished It's All in How You Fall by Sarah Henning. I think this is such a beautiful cover, by the way. So this is another contemporary. I read so many contemporaries in June, and I only realized that now. So this is a contemporary, I guess you could call it a contemporary romance, but I feel like the main character development is just as important in the story as the romance. So our main character is Caroline Kepler, also known as Caro, and she was, for years and years, for most of her life, she has been a gymnast, like Olympic bound gymnast. She's very, very good. And the training is obviously incredibly intense, so this has taken up the majority of her life. And then at the very beginning, she's had kind of some chronic back pain that ends up coming to a head when she has an injury that basically takes her out of the sport for good. Like there's no amount of treatment or physical therapy that's going to make her able to do gymnastics again, and she is understandably very devastated. So she's really like grieving the loss of this thing that is so important to her. I feel like I keep, without meaning to, picking up books that deal with that, and I'm finding it very cathartic, but also, I don't know, a little intense. But anyway, so Caro ends up just with a lot of time on her hands, and she's really struggling because her whole life was gymnastics. Like not just like the competition and the training and all of that, but like her friends she made through gymnastics, and like the way that like just all of these aspects of her life were tied up in something that now she can't do and is like a source of, you know, pain for her, which I really connected with. And then one of Caro's brother's friends, Alex, he ends up deciding that he's going to help her by kind of introducing her and giving her like a trial run for all of these different sports to see if there's one that she is interested in pursuing and that she enjoys. Not to like replace gymnastics, but just to like have something else to pursue. And Alex is just like the sweetest, kindest person. I loved him. So he's doing this thing for Caro, and Caro has like decided that she has to like repay him somehow, even though Alex is like, no, it's fine, I just want to help you. So Caro decides that she's going to set him up with this one girl who happens to be one of Caro's friends and who happens to be a longtime crush of Alex. But then of course other feelings get in the way, and yeah, like as I said, there is that romance element that is fairly prominent, but I think equally prominent is Caro's character arc and her journey, and I really, really liked this. Like I did enjoy the previous contemporary that I read by Sarah Henning, but I liked this one even more. I loved Caro. She is just so strong and confident and interesting and just very, very competent and smart, and I love that. And she's a really interesting and believable balance of, again, that confidence, but also that kind of like self-deprecatingness, and also like having this, like being your own worst critic, you know? And as I said, Alex is just like the sweetest. Like I really, really loved him as a character. We don't get his point of view, but we do obviously see a lot of him, and I just really liked him, and I did enjoy him and Caro together. Y'all know that I really love the matchmaker trope, and I will say that while I liked the relationship between Alex and Caro, it didn't quite give me everything I wanted. Like this isn't my favorite execution of that trope, but I did still enjoy their interactions. I think I wanted more time spent on like the figuring out that they have feelings, and also I think it's pretty clear from very early on how Alex feels about Caro, and I don't know, like that took some of the interest away from me. But if you don't like that kind of conflict in your romance, this might be a great pick for that. And I also just think the supporting characters were really interesting as well. And yeah, just thematically and what this says about like passions and like pursuits that you can no longer pursue for your own safety, and like the kind of hole that that leaves. I just really, really connected with that. As far as things that I didn't like, besides that element of the romance, I had kind of mixed feelings about the writing. Like there was some of the dialogue and humor that really worked for me, that was really great. There were some turns of phrase that were really interesting or funny. But then there were also parts that just felt like kind of clunky or like weirdly phrased. I remember I had this problem with the other book I read by Sarah Henning as well. So like I liked the writing, but there were parts that would kind of trip me up a little bit because it just didn't click with my brain. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I gave It's All in How You Fall 4 stars. Next, I finished Monster Calls by Patrick Ness, and the original concept for the story was by Siobhan Dowd, who unfortunately passed away before writing the novel. And this is like technically a reread, but it's not, I don't know, it doesn't really count as a reread for me because I did not own a copy of this, and I read it so long ago that I'm basically, I like knew the general premise, but I kind of feel like I was going into this book as if I hadn't read it before. And I remembered the first time I read it, I was like pretty underwhelmed with it. Like I knew so many people love this book. Like I think did this win one of the Carnegie medals or something? Like everybody seems to love this book, and I just was not that wowed the first time I read it. So I thought I'd give it another try because I ended up with this copy, and I feel like my thoughts are pretty much the same. I might appreciate it a little more on reread, but I still don't think this is the most compelling story about this topic, and I have not summarized it at all. So our main character is Connor, and his mother has cancer. And I think it's pretty far advanced at this point, and he is really understandably struggling a lot with that, and with what that means for him and their family. His parents are also divorced, and so that makes things very complicated as well. And Connor is just really, he's grieving and he's angry, and he doesn't feel like anybody understands what he's going through. He's also dealing with some things at school, including bullying, and like there's just, like, this poor kid is really, really suffering. And so even when he's like lashing out and like responding really badly, I feel like it's very understandable why he is. And so the kind of start of the book is Connor has this dream, this like recurring dream with this kind of monster or like creature who's like this ancient, like powerful force of nature, like connected to like the yew tree in their yard. And the monster says that he's going to come to Connor 3 nights and tell him 3 stories, and then Connor's going to have to tell him like his story, like this one specific story that Connor really doesn't want to say, that he hasn't told anybody. And so then we like see those stories, and we also see Connor in his everyday life. We see him and his mother's relationship, and like, yeah, like I said, I think I appreciate it a little more, but I still think there are books of this type and age category that deal with these issues much better. Like if you're talking about middle grade books that deal with grief, I think, like I was just talking about, you know, King and the Dragonflies, I just think there are ones that do it more effectively. I do like, I'm glad that a lot of people really connected to this book and like got something out of it. Maybe this introduced some people to middle grade. I think that would be cool. Although maybe this is shelved as young adult, which doesn't make any sense. But yeah, so I did really love the way the relationship between Connor and his mother was portrayed. That was really, really beautiful. And there's one part that has stuck with me since the first time I read this book, and like still I think about now. There's this one moment where they have a conversation where his mother is basically forgiving him in advance for fighting. Like I'm getting like emotional just talking about it. Like there was something about that part that just really, really got to me. Like I thought that was just such a mom thing to do, you know, to like forgive one of your kids in advance for like the way they talked back to you because they were hurting and they love you. I'm also very, very close with my mom, so I'm sure that was part of it as well. So like there were moments that really connected with me, but as a whole, I think like the fantasy element just didn't work for me here. It felt kind of like a little over dramatic. Like the dialogue especially felt a little bit, not even pretentious, but again, just over dramatic. Like it really took me out of the story. And also some of the dialogue between Connor and the other kids felt weird. And then another thing that like got to me is like the monster like makes fun of Connor, like, oh, you think I'm gonna bring you these life lessons as stories? Like, you think that's what's happening? Like, that's ridiculous or something. But like that's like literally what he's doing. That's like exactly what he's doing, and I don't feel like we're supposed to feel that way, you know? Like I don't think that was like the author being like, oh, the monster or the creature doesn't realize that they're doing this. Like it felt like weirdly written, because it was like this book was trying to comment on the idea of like using, you know, like every story has to have a message and a meaning, but it didn't really do that because like that was like literally the plot of the book. Do you know what I mean? So I do think that the themes like at the core of this book were obviously important, and there were moments that really worked for me. And as I said, I was very emotionally invested, but as a whole, this just, it was underwhelming for me. I don't know. This is not for me. I honestly have this theory that a lot of the reason that this book did so well is that people were picking this up who don't read a lot of middle grade, and they were like shocked that it dealt with these topics at all. Do you know what I mean? Which is not to say those people are wrong for enjoying this book. I'm just saying I wonder if this might work for you a lot better if you haven't read as much middle grade. But anyway, 3-ish stars, maybe 3.5, but I think I have established that this is just not my thing. Next, I finished Jimmy's Blues by James Baldwin, or Jimmy's Blues and Other Poems. This is James Baldwin's poetry collection. I think it's made up of a few different sort of mini collections, and I finally read something by James Baldwin, and yeah, just incredible. I feel like I don't have, like, sometimes with poetry, I don't have as many like specifics of things to say because I just have like overall impressions. James Baldwin writes a lot about racism in the US and also about being a gay black man and like the intersections of those things. One thing that I really loved is the way that James Baldwin uses rhyme and rhythm. I am so impressed when authors can do that in a way that doesn't feel like overly sing-song, you know, because I really appreciate well done rhyming poetry, and I feel like this is very, very well done. And I also really loved, it was weird to say loved, it's like I think the poems that were my favorites were often the ones where James Baldwin was talking about like life in general and like life in America as a black man, and like the like present moment and also like history and all of that, like connecting those things. I really, really love those poems. There are also quite a few more like romantic focused poems, and I think overall those didn't connect with me quite as much, but they were still well written. And yeah, just this was fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. Like, even though as with many collections there were some poems that didn't work for me as much, I feel like the quality and like the intensity of how much I enjoyed the other poems in this collection still make it a 5 stars. Next, I finished Swordheart by T. Kingfisher. This was a buddy read with my friend Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly. Both of us really, really enjoy T. Kingfisher. She's one of our favorite authors, so we thought it'd be great to buddy read this one. And unfortunately, we were both very disappointed. Neither of us liked this. I think we both gave it 2 stars. Like, I initially gave it 2.5, but honestly, it's more like a 2. And I'm really sad about it because, like, I love T. Kingfisher, but I can still have a favorite author and not love every book that they've done. So this is like kind of the first in a loosely connected series of companion books. It is set in her world of the White Rat, so like the same world as the Clocktar War series, but like following completely different characters. I do think it's like the context you have from those other books makes parts of this more interesting, but like in terms of following the story, I think you'd be fine. So this is a fantasy romance. It is 2 point of view. Hala is our female lead, and she's the housekeeper for her uncle who has just recently died, and shockingly her uncle leaves everything to her instead of to like his other family members. He's her great uncle. And yeah, all the other family members are very angry at Hala, so they basically lock her up in her house and are gonna force her to marry her cousin, her really, really unpleasant cousin, and in order to get the inheritance. Hala obviously doesn't want to do that, and when she is planning to do away with herself, she draws this sword in her uncle's room, because he keeps a lot of like weird knickknacks and like enchanted objects and stuff. So she draws this sword, and the sword is actually imprisoning our other main character, who is named Sarkis. He's been like tied to the sword, and he is compelled to like serve whoever is the wielder of the sword, and Hala is the current wielder. So Sarkis stops her from hurting herself, helps her escape, and then they begin this long trek to try and basically find a like fantasy lawyer to bring back to her town to like get her rightful inheritance and get rid of her family. Yeah, so again, I was really disappointed by this one. I did not enjoy it. Like, there were moments that worked. There were like moments of humor or like between the characters that I enjoyed. Some of the side characters I actually really loved, like Zale, this like non-binary like lawyer monk who they end up bringing with them. I loved Zale so much. And then also the Knoll who they end up taking with them. What is his name? Okay, I can't find his name, but the Knoll is also a fantastic character. And I also really liked some of the surrounding world building. Like, I loved getting to know a little bit more about like the religious and like belief systems of this world, and like Zale's Order of the White Rat. I loved learning about that. So like there were things I enjoyed, like, you know, here and there, but overall not a lot worked for me. I really didn't like the main characters. Like, Hala was fine, but like she's so like forced quirky. Like we do get a hint later that some of this is like a defense mechanism, which I understand, but I don't feel like that can fully explain how like over the top she felt. And like one of the things that I love about T. Kingfisher is how real her characters always feel. And Hala did not to me. She felt kind of like a parody of like other characters I've read. And then Sarkis was fine. Like he was definitely my least favorite male lead that T. Kingfisher has written. Like he didn't have a ton of personality. I just found him kind of like, again, underwhelming. I feel like that's the word of this video. I'm sorry for overusing that. But yeah, I didn't care for our main characters. I didn't care for the romance between them. I was really looking forward to that. I thought that was going to be really interesting, and it just didn't do a lot for me. I think that the build-up wasn't like drawn out enough. It wasn't interesting enough. And then I also was so bored in this book. Like the traveling, the amount of like time that we spent just literally going back and forth on this same freaking road. Like this is a long book. It's almost 500 pages, and like so much of it is just like the same. Like it's just going back and forth on that one road. It is so repetitive. And like I'm not somebody who enjoys travel books in general, but there are some that have won me over. I'll talk about a couple others by T. Kingfisher in a minute. But yeah, like I just was incredibly uninterested in what was happening, and it was really dull. Like it took me and Kelly like I think 1 or 2 months to finish this because we were both so bored. And then another thing that I really didn't care for is so Hala is actually a widow. She had a previous husband who we just get kind of like little glimpses of. Like he passed away like a long time ago, and the relationship doesn't seem to have been especially close. And the way that he was brought up, like in conversations between Hala and Sarkis, really bothered me. It made me so uncomfortable because there's this character who, like, in all of the references we get about him, is very strongly coded as being asexual, like sex repulsed asexual. And the book describing the way that like he had to force himself to like sleep with Hala because of like family pressures and that he really didn't want it, like the way that was described as like it was supposed to be funny, and the fact that like this was supposed to be more about like Hala's feelings and how, you know, like it's so like hard on her self-esteem to know that her husband didn't actually want to sleep with her. And it's like, of course Hala is entitled to feel hurt by that, but to frame that as like something that is about her feelings rather than the fact that the other person in the relationship is being forced to have sex they don't want, like it really bothered me. And I haven't come across anything like that in any of T. Kingfisher's other books, so I think and hope that that's like a one-off thing. But it was really, in poor taste is an understatement, like just really messed up. I think I hated how it was treated as like a romantic bonding moment between Sarkis and Hala, and also as like a humorous thing. Anyway, the last thing that I didn't like is like the way the ending played out. There was some more interesting action near the end, but then like the very end, I think is supposed to be like a romantic kind of happy ending thing, and I feel like there is one piece of that really doesn't make that possible. I don't know. Apparently this is intended to be the first book in like a series, I guess following the same characters as opposed to the companion books. So I don't know, maybe that's gonna get resolved later, but yeah, I did not like this at all. I gave Swordheart 2 stars. I'm sad about it, but I still love T. Kingfisher's other books. And I did want to mention that, like, I think this book by itself is not that great. Like, you know, it's underwhelming, but I think especially compared to other books that I have read where T. Kingfisher has done kind of journey books and has done slightly similar character dynamics, so much better. Like, I would highly recommend Nettle and Bone or the Clocktar War duology. Those are both fantastic, and I think do things in this book way better. Next, I finished The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House by Audre Lorde. This is one of the Penguin Modern Classics, so very short nonfiction, and this is the title essay, but then also a few other essays. It's only 50 pages, but like, my goodness, this is so brilliant and so good. Audre Lorde is one of those authors where I remember reading like excerpts from her like in different classes, like discussing them, and like I have been exposed to small pieces of her work before, but this is the first like full thing I've read from her, and it is absolutely brilliant. Like, this is so good that I feel like it's gonna be like really hard to even think of things to say about it that don't kind of like undersell. But I just thought this was brilliant. Like, even the names of some of the essays. So there's The Master's Tools Will Never Dismantle the Master's House, of course, which is you know, a fantastic title. But then also Poetry is Not a Luxury, Uses of Anger, and then also like Uses of the Erotic. One thing that I really thought was interesting and unusual is that when she talks about like the erotic and like these like sensory details and experiences and everything, I feel like she does not do it in a way that like limits all of that to like just like a very specific kind of sexual connotation. Like it's about like it's about like emotional honesty and like sensory like experiences, and she also talks about how that has become very gendered. Like she's so smart, like oh my goodness. Yeah, and the use of anger section I also thought was brilliant. Like the way that she talks about how like anger can be a creative force. Like when it is properly used and applied, it is absolutely necessary. She also talks a lot about like intersectionality and, you know, versus white feminism. Like so many things that we are still discussing today. Like I thought this was absolutely incredible. I feel like I could go to just about any page and pull out quotes that would be like incredible. Let me do that experiment here. Yeah, here we go. I cannot hide my anger to spare you guilt, nor hurt feelings, nor answering anger, for to do so insults and trivializes all our efforts. Guilt is not a response to anger. It is a response to one's own actions or lack of action. If it leads to change, then it can be useful, since it is then no longer guilt, but the beginning of knowledge. Yet all too often, guilt is just another name for impotence, for defensiveness destructive of communication. It becomes a device to protect ignorance and the continuation of things the way they are, the ultimate protection for changelessness. Like, oh, such a brilliant passage. Yeah, like the concept of like white guilt, again, that's something that we were talking about today, and how guilt is not a productive emotion unless it like leads you to do anything. Like 5 stars. This is brilliant. I can't wait to read more Audre Lorde. Next, I finished A Man Lay Dead by Niall Marsh. This is a bind-up of 3 of those mystery stories, so this is the first one, and I really enjoyed this. This is in the Inspector Allen series, and I guess it would be considered in like the golden age of like mysteries or detective fiction. I'm not super well versed in that. I can see how for people who read a lot of mystery thrillers, maybe this one would be very dull, but I personally really enjoyed it. I really liked the focus on characterization over like big shocking twists and things like that. I also really enjoyed the author's introduction where she's talking about how like she just wanted to write like the absolute most normal detective ever. Like I love that. So kind of the setup for this one is there's all these characters are at like a house party, and they're going to be playing the game called Murder, and of course somebody actually ends up murdered, and so it's about solving that. And actually it's one of those where we spend quite a bit of time with a main character who is not the inspector, which I thought was kind of interesting. And yeah, I really liked it. I thought that the emphasis on characterization is something that really worked for me, because that's one reason why I don't gravitate to mysteries or thrillers, because I feel like the emphasis is almost never on the characters, and I'm a character reader. But yeah, I thought that even in such a short amount of pages, I feel like we really did get a good feel for these people. You know, I got invested in them. I cared about what happened to them. I thought the like country house vibes were really great. I really loved Inspector Allen as a character. I did have mixed feelings about like the kind of ultimate unraveling of the mystery. There were some parts I was impressed with because it executed something better than I usually see it, but also there were some things that I think felt, I don't know, a little forced or over the top. Like there's this section near the end where it's like the most dramatic red herring I think I've ever read. So, you know, there's that, but like overall I did really enjoy this. As far as content, I do want to mention that like many books written in this period, there is, you know, a lot of just casual xenophobia anytime anyone is mentioned who's not from England, so keep that in mind. But like for the most part, I feel like that was much less than other books I've read from this period, until we get to like the very end, literally the last few pages, and the N-word is dropped. So, please be aware of that if you are thinking of picking this one up, but in terms of the mystery and the story, I did enjoy that, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I finished Castle Corona by Sharon Creech, illuminated by David Diaz, and I think it is so cool that they say illuminated instead of illustrated, because the style really is like these old like illuminations in like old manuscripts and everything, which I loved. So this is a kind of fairy tale fantasy feeling story. So we are following a lot of the people who live in and around the Castle Corona. We are following some of the royal family, but arguably our two main characters are these two peasants who are brother and sister. What are their names? Enzio and Pia. Kind of the setting is sort of like vaguely Italian flavored. So we're following Enzo and Pia, and then, as I said, some of the royal family, and yeah, like this was such an interesting book and a really pleasant surprise because I listened to the audiobook. I put this on because I was doing a lot of cleaning and I just needed something kind of like pleasant and light to listen to in the background, and this definitely fit the bill. For the first half, I was having a good enough time, but I wasn't like super invested. But then we started getting some really, really great character development, which I did not necessarily expect from like all of the characters really, and I really loved where the themes ended up going, like the discussion of stories and how much they matter, and I really loved the emphasis on like human dignity and especially of like the poor or like the working class, like just the way this book like looks at those things and comments on those things. I just really, really appreciated that depth. Like there is kind of the surface level story about like the royal family and like these two children and, you know, learning about other people's lives and things like that, but there's also things going on under the surface, and I should have expected that from Sharon Creech, but for whatever reason I didn't. But I ended up really enjoying this, and I gave the Castle Corona 4 stars. And I also want to mention that Jennifer Wiltsey, I think, was the narrator, and she did a really, really great job, so definitely recommend the audio if that is an option for you. And finally, I've been talking for so long, even though I didn't have that many books. Apparently I had a lot of thoughts. The last book I finished in June was Daja's book by Tamora Pierce. This is the 3rd book in the Circle of Magic series. This is part of the read-along that Beautifully Booked Bethany is hosting, and I'm a guest on with some other lovely people. I'll link our live show, but like, you guys know, this is another 5 out of 5 stars. I am loving this series so much. I'm not going to get into like the summary of the other books because you can find those in previous wrap-ups. But yeah, this is the book that is focused mainly on Daja, but we also continue to get other point of view characters as well. I just love these characters so much. I love these kids. I love the adults in their lives and how much they care about them. And I'm really impressed. I really love how Tamora Pierce is one of those authors who, even when she is writing a book for a particular like audience, all of the characters feel like equally well written and equally well fleshed out. It's one of the things I love about Frances Harding as well, is like, yes, her books might be centering like a character who's like 13, but like all of the adults still feel like real people, even if they're not like the focus of the story, and I feel like that here as well. I also really like the magic and like the problem solving element of the magic, especially since these kids are like kind of developing like abilities or like I don't know, things connected to abilities that the adults are like, you're not supposed to be able to do that, so we're just gonna do our best to figure out how to do this safely. I really love how, in terms of the magic and just in terms of these characters in general, there's an equal emphasis on the unique qualities that all of these kids have, like with their magic and just with themselves, but also the importance of teamwork and being able to rely on other people. And one thing that I really loved about this book specifically, like we saw elements of this in the other books, but because this book is primarily centered on Daja, one of the things that we see in this book is how you can honor certain elements of your culture or practices while also recognizing that there are some elements that have problems. Like we see Daja realize that with her kind of culture and the way that they treat certain people who they view as outsiders. Like we definitely see the way that other people like mistreat and like view Daja's people as well. So it goes both ways, but I just think that was a really, really nuanced and thoughtful way to look at that. And again, middle grade books can do that kind of thing. So yeah, I gave Daja's book 5 stars. I'm loving the series so much. Okay, everybody, so those were all the books that I read in June. Please comment down below. Let me know any of your thoughts on these, or if you're interested in any of them. And let me know if you've had a book recently where you're like, I love this so much that I have nothing to say about it. Because I feel like that's what happened with the Audre Lorde essays, is like, I don't even feel qualified to review this. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!